Criterions. We love them. We hate them. No way, actually no one hates them. We just love them. And I love them so much, I've picked up 7 brand spanking new Criterion Blu-rays, and I'm here to tell you a bit about the ones I've picked up. Here they are, all 7 of them in their glory. I'm going to go through each one of them individually, tell you a bit about each one of them, and whether they're worth picking up or not. Spoiler alert, they're all worth picking up because they are Criterion. Anyway, I'm rambling too much. Let's just get straight into it. The one I'm going to start you off with is Diabolique. Diabolique is directed by Henri-Georges Clouzot, who is one of my all-time favourite directors. He's often compared to Hitchcock, people call him the French Hitchcock, which I think does him a bit of a disservice because he has his own unique style, and Hitchcock himself was a big admirer of Clouzot. Hitchcock, in fact, wanted to make the film Diabolique because this is based off a novel. Hitchcock was trying to seek the rights to adapt the novel, and for whatever reason, Clouzot got there first and made this tremendous film. It was made 5 years before Hitchcock's Psycho, and there's a lot of Diabolique in Psycho. Hitchcock was a big fan of this film. Stanley Kubrick was a big fan of this film. You can see bits of The Shining in this. But yeah, just an all-around great suspense thriller. One I would recommend to absolutely everyone. And this Criterion disc is the one to go for because I had a previous edition of this from Arrow. It was the UK Blu-ray. And I was going to hold off on buying this, but then I found out that, in fact, the transfer on this is much better. So I had to get it. One of my all-time favourite films, Diabolique. I'm going to go straight into another French film. This one is La Cage aux Folles. And if you haven't seen this, just change that. You have to see this film. It's not one of French cinema's best films, highest accomplishments of cinema. But it still definitely deserves to be in the collection. So La Cage aux Folles, definitely seek this one out. Following on from La Cage aux Folles, I have another queer film, but this one is a whole other kettle of fish. It's Multiple Maniacs, directed by John Waters. If you've never seen a John Waters film before, they are insane, like completely mad. And this film in particular is just bonkers. I don't even know how to properly describe it. All I can say is that it's got that independent spirit. It tackles all sorts of taboo, sex, violence, drugs, exploitation films, monster movies. I find John Waters really inspirational. This film was made almost 50 years ago, and even though it's a mishmash of all of that stuff, we're still talking about it. And it's a great film to have in the collection. I particularly love the audio commentary on this film with John Waters himself. It was almost as entertaining as the film. Like, I watched them back to back, and that was totally spontaneous. Didn't even plan it. So, it's not a film for everyone, but it's one that's well worth giving a try, and you might even end up loving it. Now for something completely different, I have The Awful Truth. Now, The Awful Truth is a screwball comedy from 1937, starring Irene Dunne and Cary Grant, directed by the amazing Leo McCarey. And what's so intriguing about this is that it was Cary Grant's first great performance. It's the performance where he was really invented, and that's something that David Cairns goes into detail on one of the special features, talking about how it was Leo McCarey who helped invent the Cary Grant that we all came to love. So even if you're not the biggest fan of screwball comedies, it's one that is just a lot of light-hearted fun. Before the Criterion Collection, I wasn't the biggest fan of screwball comedies, but with films like It Happened One Night, The Philadelphia Story, His Girl Friday, and The Awful Truth, like all of these films made me appreciate the genre of screwball comedy. So I would say this is a gem that's worth having in your collection. This next film is one that I'll be 100% honest, I'm not totally sure that I'm sold on it. It is Metropolitan, directed by Whit Stillman. Now, Whit Stillman, I'm only really familiar with from Love and Friendship, which came out a few years ago, and I did love that film. It was an adaptation of Jane Austen, which there is a link to this film because Jane Austen is obviously a massive influence on Whit Stillman's style of humour and dialogue, and the characters in this film even reference Jane Austen a lot. So it's obvious where his inspirations lie, and I think it does work, but it's a very dialogue heavy film, and it's dealing with characters who aren't entirely likeable in any way, really. What you really like is Whit Stillman's writing, and I just couldn't make a connection with this film, but it is one that I want to go back to. And I did give a bit of a listen to the audio commentary with Whit Stillman, which was quite informative. So this is not one that I would recommend to everyone, but if you're a fan of dry humour and very novelistic dialogue, then it's worth giving a shot. Following on from Metropolitan, which I said had a very literary feel in its dialogue, I have an actual literary adaptation, The Age of Innocence. And The Age of Innocence is directed by Martin Scorsese. It's an adaptation of the Edith Wharton novel by the same name. And this is a film which I'd wanted to see for absolutely ages, but I said to myself, I'm going to hold off for a solid Blu-ray release. There were many times I could have watched it online or watched it on DVD, but I was a stubborn snob, basically, and decided that I would only watch it if it came out here on Blu-ray. And I finally did, and I absolutely loved this film. I'm a big fan of Martin Scorsese anyway, but this is one of his films which really doesn't get much attention. You know, there wasn't many resources to read about this film online. You know, there's tons of stuff written about Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, Wolf of Wall Street, but this is a film that doesn't seem to get that much appreciation, which I think is beginning to change with the arrival of it on Criterion. What I can say about this film is that it is a costume drama, so if you're not into that kind of thing, you know, maybe approach it with some hesitation, but even then, it is still worth checking out because just everything about it is done so meticulously well. It's so well crafted. It's a beautiful film. The costume design, the set design, the use of matte paintings for the background, which I absolutely loved, is just beautiful to look at. It very much reminded me of another film in the collection, Black Narcissus, because that used a lot of matte paintings to create some of the visual effects, and this definitely takes inspiration from that. I listened to some of the features as well with Scorsese and Jay Cox, and they talked a bit about their influences when making this film. And one of their influences is my favourite film of all time. It's Barry Lyndon, directed by Stanley Kubrick. And that totally comes across when you watch this. Just the attention to detail, the creation of the period is just incredible. Like I've mentioned, the costume design, the set design, and even down to the narration, which is an interesting thing because when I was taught screenwriting, one of the first things we were told was don't use voiceover, do not use narration. You should show, not tell. And what's so interesting about this film is there are points when something will happen on screen and the narration will tell us what just happened. But then it will go further. It will tell us what the character is thinking, which almost seems unintuitive. But that is what a novel does. You know, a novel allows us to get inside the minds of a character. And often that has to be done in film through actions. And for whatever reason, I can't really put my finger on it, but the narration really works in this film. I talked enough about this film already, but absolutely tremendous. If you love Scorsese, If you love any of the actors, you know, Daniel Day-Lewis, Michelle Pfeiffer, Winona Ryder, if you love any of them, you know, this is an absolute must-see. So, yeah, check it out. And the final one of these UK Criterion Blu-rays that I'm showing off is E, directed by Edward Yang. And my God, this film, I'd heard a lot of good things about this film, a lot of good things. And I went in with high expectations, but I was also ready to be disappointed because I've seen many films where people have told me, oh yeah, it's a masterpiece. It's an absolute masterpiece. And I've kind of been a bit middled on it. You know, I've liked it, but not thought it's a masterpiece. E is one of those films where everyone told me it was a masterpiece, and it is a masterpiece. This film is just perfect. And probably the worst thing about that is that I can't really describe what makes it perfect. It's centered around families, different generations within the family. There's a wedding, there's a funeral, and those are pivotal moments in the story. And that's all I'll say about the story. But it's very much in the vein of Yasujiro Ozu's films, you know, films like Tokyo Story, where it centers on interesting family dynamics. And these are real dynamics, because this is how families interact. You know, families don't interact how you see in the typical Hollywood blockbuster film. They interact how you see in films like this. It is a long film. It's 3 hours, but that just absolutely flew by. Yeah, God, there's not much more I can say about this film, really. It's one of those films that you put on and you just let it wash over you and you get absorbed. And it's a tremendous film. It's a shame Edward Yang isn't with us anymore to make more films, because, you know, when you watch this, you just wish there were many more. There's a handful of his films. There's even some in the Criterion Collection. But yeah, E is an essential viewing. Just brilliant. That concludes my latest Criterion Blu-ray haul. I hope you've really enjoyed it. Thanks very much for sticking around. If you like this video, please click the subscribe button below and leave a comment. Let me know what you thought about any of these films, if you've seen them, or if you're now thinking about seeing them. If you have any more questions, I'd be more than happy to answer. So yeah, feel free to leave a comment. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon.